Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 8 of the Spoken Greats podcast. And today we're going to take a look at Parkinson's law, which you may have seen before. It's quite popular on the internet, the notion of Parkinson's law, the idea that a task will expand to the time that it's given. So if you're given an hour to do something, it will take you an hour, and so on and so forth. But that principle is actually part of a book that was written by Northcote Parkinson, who was a Royal Navy reservist and a civil servant, who wrote a short book. It's about 100 pages, and it's just full of hilarious anecdotes about the inefficiency, not just of government, but of any organization in general. And Parkinson's law, the popularized one, is just one of many fallacies that Parkinson pointed out. So today I shall be drinking a Pelletieri Estates Vidal ice wine from Canada. So this was made in, I believe, by Lake Niagara, if I got that right. Yes, it was. So right on the border between Canada and the USA. Now, if you don't know much about ice wines are sweet dessert wines which are picked in late winter. So instead of the usual harvest time, kind of September, sort of August, September time, they pick the grapes in December or January when it's freezing temperatures and the grapes have frozen on the vines. When this happens, the water in the grapes freeze, but the sugar doesn't. And so what you're left with is an incredibly concentrated sweet must, which they then put into the wine production. And so the end result is an incredibly rich and sweet wine, usually of a lower percentage. I think this one is about 11%. Yeah, 11%. And it is pure nectar. Now, this practice originated in Germany, I think in roughly the 18th century, where it was already pretty commonplace to pick the grapes later there for, say, like October harvest to make a late harvest sweet wine, like a Riesling, for example. But in the sort of 1830s, there were some particularly bad winters, and the grapes were just left on the vines, and you thought, oh, sod it, this isn't good for wine production. We'll just leave them on there and we'll pick them later. And it turned out that it actually produced an incredibly sweet liquid, which produced a excellent dessert wine. And I love this because sometimes unintended consequences can produce a great idea. It was first popularized in Germany, but where ice wine has really come into its own is in Canada, because you need a stable cold winter, which Canada has aplenty, in order for the grapes to properly freeze. And to a lesser extent in Germany these days, as winters get warmer there, it's hard to produce on a large scale the conditions necessary to make ice wine, whereas Canada, perfect for it. So let's take a look at this. This is a beautiful gold colour, quite pale gold. As I just take a whiff of it now, already getting apricot, 100%. Bit of marmalade. Let's go in for the kill, shall we? Cheers. Jesus Christ. That is marmalade on toast. Absolutely beautiful. I think I picked this up at Lidl over Christmas time for about $7.99, but for a half bottle. The other day I was in Lidl, I think I saw a couple of them still kicking about. So if you go down to your Lidl, you might be lucky enough to find some still. But that is delicious stuff. Please let me know in the comments what you are drinking today as well. Let's take a look at Parkinson's law. The first takeaway from this is that if you want something done, ask someone who is busy. Now, this seems quite counterintuitive, because why would you ask someone who's busy? They've got other things to be doing. But precisely because they are busy, they will find the most efficient way to do something and will not spend any more time on it than they absolutely have to. If you give a task to someone who it has nothing else to do and has no other impending obligations, they will spend the best part of the day trying to do it. And in the book, he gives the example of if you were to ask someone to send a postcard for you, if you were to ask an elderly lady who's retired, she may spend most of the day going shop to shop trying to find a nice design. She might spend 20 minutes at home thinking about whether to take an umbrella with her or not, because the clouds are looking a bit funny, but she's not quite sure. And the weather forecast is about 50-50 on whether it's going to rain. And then she's lost her glasses and she's going to go around spending 20 minutes trying to find her glasses. And then she wonders whether to just post it immediately at the post office or send it to a post box. And then she thinks about, oh, what was the address again? I need to go look that up. So she spends minutes looking up that. Whereas if you ask the busy man, he will go into the nearest shop available and pick the first postcard he comes to, write it out and send it all in all in about 3 minutes. So the exact same task, which one person has spent an entire afternoon toiling over, someone else achieved in 3 minutes. And this is because the busy man had other things to do. And so that created a sense of urgency. And this is critical. When we have no time constraints on things, we naturally expand our activity because we don't have that sense of urgency. I always like to think about this in the context of friends. You ever say to a friend, oh, we should meet up sometime? Have you noticed that sometime becomes never? It's because there's no date on it. And if you leave it open to the grand expanse of time, it will take as long as you allow it to. Whereas I suppose if you go, let's meet up on March 15th, you have a definitive date there where it has to be done, and you're much more likely to meet up with each other. And this is how someone who has a busy schedule can ironically end up spending more time with the people they care about versus someone who has more free time, but just because they are forced by necessity to state a time when they intend to meet. You can also see this in tourism. Isn't it interesting how in your hometown there may be some kind of tourist attraction, which you've lived there for the best part of a few decades, and you've never got round to going yourself, whereas a tourist is there for 2 days and ticks it off immediately. This is because of a sense of urgency, but also a sense of scarcity. I know I can go to Buckingham Palace at any opportunity, and so I don't go. Because I know that over the course of my lifetime, I have an infinite number of opportunities to go. And so I delay and delay. Whereas if I go to China, I know very likely I probably won't visit China again. So of course I'm going to go see the Great Wall of China. And if I told people I've been to China and they asked me, have I seen the Great Wall? And I said no, I'd feel a bit of a tit. And so there is a pressing sense of urgency there. And when you have only 4 weeks of holiday a year, or 2 if you happen to be American, the sense of urgency creates a focus to tick off as many tourist attractions as you can. Versus when you live somewhere, you're not in a rush because I'm going to be here for the next 30 years. I could go at any time. But ironically, because you could go at any time, you go at no time. One of my favorite lessons that Parkinson points out is that the number of people in an organization is no correlation to the amount of work being done. And he points out the rise of the number of civil servants or officials in the government. And you may be led to consider either 2 possibilities. One, that the amount of work that the government is doing is increasing, or two, civil servants will be finding themselves with less things to do because there's more of them to share the workload, and so they can have a more balanced work life. However, Parkinson says that neither of these is true, and in fact, there's no correlation between workload and the number of people. And many civil servants, despite an increase in the number of civil servants, will find themselves burnt out or exhausted from their workload. But this does not denote that their work is necessarily purposeful or productive. Parkinson states that there are two rough axiomatic statements. The first one: an official wants to multiply subordinates, not rivals. And two, officials make work for each other. So there's two ways that this can play out. First of all, if you hire more subordinates instead of people at the same grade or rank as you, then that increases your power and status. You suddenly have more power within the organization, and this puts you in good stead for future promotion. The other thing that this does is that it pulls the ladder away from the people below you, because by creating more subordinates, you can divide the job that you used to do into two separate roles. And so you hire twice the number of people to do the same amount of work. This also makes your subordinate less likely to be able to replace you, because now they are not doing the exact job you used to do. They are only doing partial amounts of the job you were doing, and so you can point out some of their inadequacies. And so hiring these extra people does not lead to increased output, because these people are doing the divided work and then create a convoluted process. So person A will do work for person B, he will send it to person C to QA, they will then send it to person G for some reason to approve, and it will go back in the chain. And thus what used to be a more streamlined task is now taken up by the back and forth of 7 people talking to each other. And then they have to have meetings and email chains, and all of this back and forth creates more work for everyone. And so those 7 people, whilst they may not achieve a lot, will then report that they are feeling overworked and can't cope with their work demands. And so they will then go on to hire subordinates to divide up the work in order to cope with the busyness that's been created. Now, Parkinson uses the example of the Admiralty, the command which oversaw the Royal Navy, and he points out how the number of civilian officials in Whitehall increases over time, even though the number of ships that the Royal Navy has decreases and the number of sailors and officers decreases. Quick stat: in 1914, the Navy had 62 capital ships, 146,000 officers and sailors, 2,000 Admiralty officials. In 1928, they had 20 capital ships in commission, so 67% fewer ships, 100,000 personnel, so 31% fewer personnel, and 3,569 Admiralty officials, so a 78% increase in civil servants in the Admiralty. Now, you may make the argument that technology was advancing and that engineers and those with expertise were required to oversee the productions of more modern warships. And you could say, fair enough, there was a 40% increase in dockyard officials, maybe as the shipbuilding became more technical. However, in that same time, the number of people in Whitehall increased by nearly 80%. So nearly twice the number of people were being added to Whitehall at the same time as for every one engineer that was being sent to Portsmouth. And this is whilst the number of sailors was being reduced by 1/3 and the number of ships by 2/3. And it's not like they were projecting an increase in the size of the Navy, because after the First World War, the United Kingdom signed the Washington Treaty, which limited the size of its navy. And so the Admiralty was expanding, regardless of any correlation with being at peacetime or anticipating being in a future war. Parkinson says here that the officials would have multiplied at that same rate, whether there were any sailors or none. And he goes on to give the example of the Colonial Office, which was the government department responsible for administering the colonies of the British Empire, and that in 1935 it had 372 officials, and in 1954 it had 1,661 officials. Now, even accounting for an increase during World War II, this represents a peacetime growth of about 5% every year. This is not proportionate to what the Colonial Office was doing. The British Empire was much larger in 1935. By 1954, most colonies were in the process of being handed back. There was less for the Colonial Office to do, and yet it had a lot more civil servants. You can even see this today with the size of the UK Ministry of Defence. So all in all, the armed forces is roughly around 150,000 plus another 30 to 40,000 reservists. That's being very optimistic. And yet the number of civil servants who work for the Ministry of Defence numbers over 60,000. So the British Army is at its smallest it's ever been. It's at just slightly over 72,000 personnel. And yet there are over 40 senior officers with the rank of general, either major general, lieutenant general, or general. Compare that with the Israeli military, which is larger than the entire UK armed forces and is commanded by a lieutenant general. So it has one lieutenant general instead of 11 and 24 major generals instead of 40. And again, the United States Marine Corps, which on its own is larger than the entire British Ministry of Defence, only has 60 generals. So it raises the question, just what are these people doing? Now, I'm sure they're very busy. I don't doubt that. However, is it possible that through the creation of subordinates, they have created more work to be done? A brigadier cannot appoint another brigadier to help him with his work, and so he has to appoint a colonel, and likewise a major general cannot appoint another major general to help him with his work, and so he has to appoint a brigadier. And with this becomes the division of roles. And so this is where you get to the absurd scenario where a major or a lieutenant colonel is making cups of tea in a division headquarters. To appoint anyone of a lower rank than the one rank immediately below you would be to undermine your position completely and would suggest that someone of a much lower rank could fulfill the same task. Now, often in modern warfare, there's the expression of the strategic corporal. This is where an infantry soldier on the ground can have strategic effects in terms of what happens. Say they happen to shoot a civilian or cause some kind of controversy. The effects of that could escalate around the world. But another phenomenon which has arisen is the tactical minister. This is where more senior leadership become increasingly concerned with minute tactical details. And Parkinson talks about this in the next part, which relates to finance. And this is what he calls the law of triviality. It means that the time spent on any item of the agenda will be in inverse proportion to the sum involved. And this is because human beings struggle to conceptualize large numbers. A human being has a concept of what thousands mean, but billions is an extremely large number, and it doesn't even feel real. And Parkinson gives the example here of the construction of a nuclear power plant, where they spend a small percentage of the meeting talking about the cost of the power plant. And everyone quietly agrees that this £10 billion is the reasonable amount. Because of the people in the room, there's only one person that understands how a nuclear power plant works. And even though he questions the fact that 10 billion seems like a perfectly round number, and how did they get to such an exact figure, he can't be bothered to explain to the rest of the people who do not understand how a nuclear power plant works. And so that item gets pushed through quite easily. And as they go on through the meeting, they get to the point of a coffee fund and talking about, should we have a coffee fund for our workers? And everyone's in agreement, yes, this is a perfectly good idea. And someone makes a suggestion that perhaps £50 a month should be appropriate for fulfilling this amount. And of course, someone challenges this and says, £50? Where are you getting this figure from? I know how much a cup of coffee costs. You don't need to be throwing away £50 a month on such things. And of course, the discussion goes on. And this is because everyone knows about coffee. And so to justify their existence, each of the officials take their turn in saying something at the meeting, just to remind everyone that they're there. And so a good 30 minutes of the meeting is taken up on the appropriate cost of a brew fund to buy coffee for everyone. And then everyone walks away feeling quite pleased with themselves that they've contributed to the meeting and they've managed to save the department a whopping £10 per month. Meanwhile, they've approved the construction of a £10 billion nuclear power plant, which has had minimal financial oversight. This is why you may find in an organisation, when you're claiming expenses, you will be furiously audited by an accountant for claiming for £5 for a sandwich. Meanwhile, procurement has just approved a sale of £1.5 billion. Because everyone knows how much a sandwich should cost, no one really knows how much an IT system or a new piece of equipment should cost. I do wonder sometimes whether this also applies outside of finance, in that many senior leaders, politicians, business folk end up spending a lot of time discussing trivial matters as opposed to the wider issue. The issue that always makes me think about this is the COVID pandemic, when you had cabinet ministers talking on national TV about whether a Scotch egg was considered a substantial meal and whether that was permissible or not to consume in a pub. Is talking about the financial implications of the actions that were being taken to the country. I do wonder, when people express a dislike for people online, how much of it is related to what they've said versus what they've actually done. Are we merely more concerned about optics and how things look as how they actually are? I don't know. It's one to consider. I'm just some guy. Anyway, law of trivialities. I think we'll leave it there for today. Thank you for listening to the Spoken Greats podcast. If you enjoyed this video, please like and hit the subscribe button. Look forward to more great ideas from great books. See you soon.